The Indianapolis Colts return to Lucas Oil Stadium today against the Bears. Let's get to it. Thank you, everybody, for being here with us today. This is your in-house Indianapolis Colts pregame show from the Locked On Colts podcast, only at Nevermore at Union Station. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Jake Arthur. My normal co-host, Zach Hicks, lives out in Virginia, so he's obviously not going to be out here for doing these. But as I mentioned, you've heard and seen us on the Locked On Colts podcast. We also write for horseshoehuddle.com, which is the Colts team website for Sports Illustrated and Fan Nation. Just a little about me. I am a member of the Colts day-to-day media. I was also out at Grand Park every day in Westfield for training camp practice. So throughout today's show, I'll share with you guys a little bit about what I learned about this year's squad, what I think moving forward. Today's our first live pregame show, but we'll actually be doing this before every Colts home game throughout the season. So come back, tailgate with us, eat, drink, be merry, and all that good stuff. After today, we'll be back here for regular season week 1 on September 10th. The Colts cheerleader alumni will be here also, so that'll be fun. So on today's show, I'm going to kind of walk you guys throughout training camp, including the 2 joint practices that they just had with the Bears this week, as well as preview tonight's game against the 2 teams. So we'll just jump into those 2 practices real quick that they had on Wednesday and Thursday. The Bears came down over to Grand Park. It was a nice little battle between Anthony Richardson and Justin Fields. Kind of entertaining at first, but these are clearly 2 teams that want to establish the run. They have young quarterbacks that they're just not quite unleashing yet. So it was a little different look because, especially for Anthony Richardson, this is his first NFL training camp. He's been going at it against Gus Bradley's defense this entire time. So it was 2 days where he got to go against Matt Eberflus's defense. That's, of course, a defense that they give you the 2 high safety looks. They specialize in taking away the deep play. And it was kind of, honestly, it was the 2 least explosive practices really that we've seen from the Colts so far. You know, even Richardson on his worst days likes to look downfield a little bit, and we just really didn't see that from him in those 2 practices very much. Lots of dinking and dunking. Honestly, while it wasn't necessarily exciting, I thought that was good to see him get out there and do that because number one, it gives him a different defensive scheme to look at. But, you know, those short and intermediate passes, that was kind of the thing that he needed to work on the most in terms of accuracy and things like that. So great to see him go against a Matt Eberflus defense. We all have seen that for years now. As far as Justin Fields goes, now I heard from a lot of people who cover the Bears who were here visiting, Fields normally does kind of shred it up in 7-on-7s, and he did just that against the Colts. 11-on-11s when there's pressure and there's a lot more schematic things and coverage going on. That's when he maybe struggles a little bit, and that is what we saw. So it was good from a Colts perspective to see them kind of really put a cap on one of the most exciting young quarterbacks in the NFL. Now, Fields and Richardson did run quite a bit, as to be expected between those 2. Richardson was probably the most run happy he's been, both from scrambles and design runs. You knew that was coming at some point. I think when the Colts can control practice a little bit and it's their offense versus their defense, they obviously want to put more of an emphasis on the pass and develop them that way. But as far as the Colts defense versus the Bears offense, there was a lot of pressure put on Justin Fields. Guys like Kwity Paye did really well in that. Dayo Dangbo did some nice things. Samson Ebukam even got in there. Unfortunately, DeForest Buckner missed those practices, but it kind of is what it is. The Colts secondary really stood out there. Obviously, if Fields wasn't able to pass a whole lot, those Colts guys roaming deep were doing really well. Nick Cross had 2 interceptions in the first day of practices. He also had a big hit and then another big pass breakup on the second day. Rodney Thomas had an interception in the first day as well. And then on day 2, EJ Speed came up with his own interception. So really impressive couple of practices for the Colts back 7 in those 2 days. As can be expected, fights. Whenever 2 teams get together, tempers usually flare a little bit, obviously. The first day, they kind of kept their composure a little bit, some shoving matches. But on day 2, they were tired of going against each other. Those shoving matches turned into not all-out brawls, but there were some sideline clears for sure. Colts tight end Farrell Brown actually got thrown out of the second practice by Shane Steichen. So the coaches, while they encourage their guys standing up for each other, being physical, they obviously don't want them going too far. So also in this week of roster moves throughout training camp, it's been pretty eventful, honestly. Some unfortunate events. Obviously, Ashton Dulin tore his ACL. He is now on IR for the remainder of the season. Same with Jannard Avery. I believe his was an LCL and meniscus. Both those guys are going to have season-ending surgery. Pretty unfortunate there because Dulin, we all know what he can do. That's the Colts' best special teams player. He was a second-team All-Pro just a couple years ago. Jannard Avery was going to be a nice little addition to the defensive end rotation. Probably provided a lot of the stuff that Tyquan Lewis can, for example. And we all know with Tyquan Lewis, he's always struggled with injuries. It's been a problem of staying healthy, but he gives you a lot while he's out there. So guys that they brought in to make up for those moves, James Washington is a wide receiver. I'm sure a lot of you guys are probably pretty familiar with. Came in from the Steelers. I believe he came with the Cowboys as well. DJ Montgomery was here with the Colts last summer. Did some nice things in training camp in the preseason. And then they also brought in local product Tyler Adams, who is a wide receiver out of Butler. So he's someone who he's got some nice size to him, pretty good athleticism. I'm not sure if any of those guys are coming in soon enough to really make the roster necessarily. Maybe Washington. He's the guy that can block. He can also get downfield. In college, he was always a big play guy. That was kind of his deal with the Steelers as well. But he kind of does those dirty work things that Ashton Dulin did. So if there's one receiver that you, not just to take those snaps, but literally fill that role that Dulin did, James Washington might be that guy. So looking at training camp as a whole, lots of big storylines going into it. We got some things answered. Some developments, really, that I have a lot of people still talking, but some things that Zach and I have talked a lot about over the last several days. First up, new head coach Shane Steichen. What does he bring to the table? What does his new offense look like? So first and foremost, pretty much an entirely new offensive staff other than Reggie Wayne. The guys that he has brought in, these players really seem to gravitate towards these guys, and they're really connecting with the new coaching staff. You look at Tony Sperano Jr., the offensive line really seems to enjoy playing for him so far. Cam Turner has done a lot of interesting things in the past with mobile quarterbacks like Anthony Richardson as well. Tight ends coach Tom Manning had a really successful run with the Colts in his previous tenure here before going back to the college ranks. So really good offensive staff that Steichen has brought along with him. One thing that was painfully evident this last couple of years, especially last year with Matt Ryan and Sam Ehlinger and Nick Foles at quarterback, was there was really no vertical offense. But they went out and, they drafted a guy like Alec Pierce, Jelani Woods, guys that can stretch the field, but they just really were not able to do that. Part of it was the offensive line. Part of it was firing your head coach midseason, and now you're kind of scrambling with your play calling. And then you, of course, have an older quarterback who can't push the ball down the field as much. With Shane Steichen, I think it's going to reintroduce the vertical offense back to Indy. It's one of the things people always loved about the Peyton Manning and the Andrew Luck eras. So Anthony Richardson, obviously, QB1, he's more than capable of getting that ball downfield. I'm sure you guys all saw the videos. I posted one. The Colts Twitter account posted one as well this week. The guy can just throw the ball a mile. So arm strength is never going to be an issue there. He also is not afraid to go downfield either. He's going to take a lot of the shorter stuff, the checkdowns and things like that. But overall, the guy's going to try and push the ball downfield. He's connected really well with Alec Pierce so far throughout training camp. You guys saw in the preseason, Richardson had that really beautiful throw to him right in front of the end zone that Pierce just couldn't pull in. That kind of stuff will get worked out. But that's the kind of stuff I think we're going to see with more regularity. Now, another thing I think we're going to see is the run game. I think it's going to be, I don't think it's going to be the big disaster a lot of people think it might be without Jonathan Taylor until he gets back. I think schematically, Shane Steichen wants to spread things out a bit. Spreading the ball out more and getting your offensive linemen out in space a little more, it's going to create more holes for the running backs to get, or wider holes for them to get through. Doing a lot of runs out of shotgun and pistol and things like that. I think regardless of who the running back is, they'll be somewhat productive. We saw that last year with Zach Moss. He had like at least 65 yards rushing each of the last 4 or 5 games of the season and did really well in place of Jonathan Taylor late in the season. So when Zach Moss gets back, that'll be fine, I think. Deion Jackson is a decent between the tackles runner. Evan Hull, we started to see what he's going to bring to the table. I think he'll be able to provide some juice off tackle, running to the outside. Really nice pass catcher, good special teams player as well. Kenyon Drake probably factors into that also. So it could be just a big rotation until if and when, Jonathan Taylor gets back, because we obviously know what he can do while he's in there. Shane Steichen, so far so good. We have to see what it looks like in gameplay. During the preseason, they're not really game planning and drawing up many, exotic looks. So we'll see come week 1, September 10th against the Jaguars, what things look like. And then, like I mentioned, Anthony Richardson, the guy looks the part. Again, he can throw the ball a mile. He's really well built. He's a 6'4", 6'5", 250, 60-pound quarterback, and he moves like Jonathan Taylor, essentially. So the guy is just the best athlete you can imagine in the quarterback position. As in terms of how he approaches the game, everyone has raved all about how, he's basically a football nerd, studying, always in the playbook, always texting his coaches after hours, this and that, seeing what he can do to get better. We have seen him throughout practices have a really rough start to practice and then, build up and get a lot better by the end of the day. So that's one reason that, they drafted him, but also that they were comfortable with making him QB1. He earned the starting quarterback role at this point. And, watching each practice, Gardner Minshew has things he does well. He takes what the defense gives him, doesn't make a lot of mistakes. Physically, there's a ceiling there for him as a quarterback, though. But he's generally pretty accurate and has an okay arm. But Anthony Richardson, you can just see a world of possibilities when you would see one guy versus the other. I thought the offense tended to move a bit better when Richardson was back there at quarterback. The offense just flowed a bit more. If your running backs aren't hitting home very well, you've got this guy now that can bust things outside. He can pick up those 5, 6, 7-yard runs when that may not have been an option before with a more, grounded quarterback like that. So that's, that's nice. He earned this job. It was always going to be him eventually. It wasn't necessarily Anthony Richardson versus Gardner Minshew in the quarterback competition. It was essentially Anthony Richardson versus future Anthony Richardson when he's ready. And the Colts liked what they saw enough through the first couple weeks of training camp practices and that preseason game against the Bills to go ahead and make it happen. And we've seen things like he's probably a better passer already than people anticipated. I think we thought there was going to be a lot of clunkiness and, just poor, inaccurate play, but that really hasn't been it. On his days where he's not even really hitting the targets really well, it's been more of a matter of timing. So that's just something that comes along with more reps with your receivers and things like that. And now that he is officially the starting quarterback, he doesn't really have to flip-flop between all the guys that he's playing with. He's going to be playing behind the same line with the same receivers and same tight ends and running backs. So continuity is going to be key in his development as well. So that's been a big thing to look at throughout training camp. And I mentioned Jonathan Taylor a little bit. Just any Colts fans that have been, I guess, living under a rock with this. So came into camp unhappy with his contract situation, which, of course, he's a top 3, top 5 running back in the NFL, only making like $4 million a year. in terms of the rest of the league and where he's being paid, he is very underpaid for sure. But he came in, he started training camp on the physically unable to perform list with an ankle injury. He had a procedure done on his ankle in January to clean that up. The normal recovery time for that is about a month. So him starting on PUP and still being there really is a bit concerning. A lot of people, say this feels like kind of a holdout, a hold in. He's been there with the team, but not participating. There have been a couple times where he's been excused to go off-site, and he actually is with an excused absence right now, dealing with some personal matters. But this is honestly, I feel like I can gauge the temperature of a lot of storylines going on with this team right now and how it's going to go. I have no idea how this thing goes with Jonathan Taylor this year. He's unhappy. The Colts don't really seem too willing to play ball with giving a new contract, and reportedly they haven't even come to the table and made an offer, which if I'm Taylor's side, that's a little out of line, I would think, because we've seen them extend other guys early before. Grover Stewart was extended in season, Braden Smith, Shaquille Leonard, these guys Brent Nelson have all gotten new contracts, right before training camp, during training camp, in the season, a year ahead of time. So it's something the Colts are very willing to do. So to do it for a player who is top 5 at his position across the league, I get the frustration. At the same time, he doesn't have a whole lot of leverage. It probably best suits him if he's healthy to go out there and have another solid season and then garner some trade interest from across the league. Because right now, he's a guy who's hurt with an injury that had the procedure in January. And he wants a new contract. So there's not a lot of leverage other than a big leap of faith and, explaining to inquiring teams, I really am healthy. If that's the case, I'll be healthy enough to play. And, I'll take a decent contract if you guys play ball. So totally up in the air. I think the Colts' unwillingness to really meet him at the table necessarily is what has me with the biggest question mark about it. Because I don't see him coming out on top of this unless he gets traded, really. Otherwise, I think he's either going to have to play or just stay on the injured list all year. I don't think really there's many options there. So turning to a situation that we've kind of seen before, but is now more optimistic. Shaquille Leonard, all-pro linebacker, one of the biggest playmaking defenders in the entire league. Zach and I did this really kind of glum-sounding episode before training camp started because things didn't sound super promising in terms of, is he going to be back there or not? Is he going to be back during training camp at all? And then lo and behold, he's there from the beginning. The only practice Shaq has really missed is this most recent one. And we haven't had an explanation for that, but so far nothing's come out about there being anything that's a big issue. So he's been out there. He's played in a preseason game, which means he's been cleared for full contact. Gus Bradley did say the next thing they're waiting to see from him is more tackling, getting more physically involved and just get the tests of playing linebacker, essentially, because it is one of the most physically demanding positions on the football field. So they want to see how he holds up with that. So, he had the game against the Bills. He had the first joint practice against the Bears. So that's 2 big physical tests. We'll see what this thing is, where he missed practice on Thursday. But so far, so good. It's been really, really encouraging. He's light years ahead of where I thought he might be at this point. Because, again, we didn't even know if he would be back this season still. So that was kind of a scary thing to think about. Now you're looking ahead. The Colts have a pretty solid-looking linebacker group with E.J. Speed, Zaire Franklin, and Shaquille Leonard. So Colts fans can breathe a sigh of relief because that's a guy that brings a lot of juice to the defense. It's a unit that really struggled to create turnovers last year. They were near the bottom of the league. But before that, whenever Shaquille has been playing, they've been near the top of the league. He just has an uncanny knack to produce takeaways, whether it's an interception that just seems to fall in his lap or punching out 5, 6, 7 balls per year against running backs. Like, the guy can just do things that others can't, and this defense really needed his return. And then one of the last glaring things, throughout training camp has been the youth movement. I think the Colts now know, this team is going to look a bit different because they're not just a decent quarterback away from competing and getting back to the playoffs. They have had some really decent rosters that, if you do get more solid quarterback play in there, they probably go far. 2021 was a pretty good roster if they would have had more competent quarterback play. But now they're kind of embracing the fact that they need to rebuild a little bit. They've gone really heavily with their youth movement. They drafted 12 guys this year. There's going to be other, rookie, second, third-year guys playing significant snaps. You look at positions like quarterback, obviously, with Anthony Richardson, 21-year-old kid there. Wide receiver, you've got Michael Pittman, who is the older guy, but, Ashton Doolin was a veteran who is now gone for the year. You've got Josh Downs as a rookie, Alec Pearson, his second year. So you're looking to these guys to step up a bit. Tight end is the same way. Mo Alley Cox kind of drifting into the back while Jelani Woods, Drew Ogletree, Will Mallory is a newcomer. Kylan Granson, this is year 3. These younger guys are just coming along. Defensive line is kind of the same way. Dio and Quiddy Pay, it's year 3, so they're kind of veterans at this point. But they still are unproven over the course of a season as to what they can do. Both of them have had some injuries. You've got Adetome Adebore at defensive tackle, who you're looking to see what he can do. Titus Leo. So they're really dependent on their youth to kind of take the next step and get better throughout the year before they can really say that they're going to compete to be winning a bunch of games, get into the playoffs. With that said, you're not really looking for them to win 9, 10, 11 games, make the playoffs at this point. You're kind of just looking to them to improve, get better all the time. You see these young guys, limit the glaring mistakes as the season goes on. But yeah, I don't think we're going to see a lot of those like completely lopsided affairs like we did last year, where you give up 33 points here and there, 2 weeks in a row. I think that's the kind of thing you just try to aim to avoid. You want to see these young guys getting a little better. So coming up here, we're going to talk about specifically, what each of these position groups, offense and defense, look like after training camp and moving forward into this season. But first, we're going to talk to you about our friends over at LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available, and that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. They help you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Just add your job and the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you are hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so that you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus the leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, I see some of you guys here in the comments. So I'm doing a live show today here at Nevermore in Indy. It is very artsy, I agree. But no, if you're just joining in, I am live on location today. If it's not too late, come on out. We're at Nevermore at Union Station. So looking ahead to this offense now, what do each of these position groups look like? What are kind of the main concerns coming out of training camp? So we talked about it a bit here with quarterback and Anthony Richardson, how the offense is going to look. So again, I mentioned, I think the vertical element of the passing game will be back. He's not really afraid to test things deep. Now, I do think we're going to see when you give him those cover two high safety looks, he probably won't be willing to push it as much. He might be more apt to look at the soft spots in the zones and the intermediate, 15 to 20 yards downfield. Probably won't see those downfield 40, 50-yard bombs on the outside. It's just probably not how it's going to work. I do think it's going to be a pretty run-centric offense, regardless of whether Jonathan Taylor is out there or not. If Taylor is out there, it's going to take some of the heat off of Richardson. But if Taylor's not out there, I think we're going to see a heavy dose of Anthony running the ball at least 10, 15 times a game, maybe. You obviously have Zach Moss when he's healthy, who should be around by week 1 or week 2. Evan Hull, Deion Jackson, those guys, it'll be a rotation, very run heavy, at least 50-50. I think Shane Steichen would like to pass the ball a little more, but some weeks I just don't think that's going to necessarily be a great possibility. Now, looking at those running backs, obviously Jonathan Taylor is the big question mark. But, for now, we got to cover the guys who are actually there. And he is not, unfortunately. So until they activate him off the physically unable to perform list, we're just going to have to move forward as if he's not playing. So Zach Moss, in his place last year in those last several games, looked really good. He's got the broken arm right now, but the Colts have not put him on any injured lists. His timeline, if he's not back to play by week 1, it looks like he should be back within those first couple weeks, at least to practice. It was a 4 to 6 week recovery, and the long end of that was going to put him just after the week 1 game. So Zach Moss, I think, will be the starter until Jonathan Taylor gets back. Until Moss gets back himself, you're looking at Deion Jackson as the top running back. He's got a lot of juice to him. He's a guy who can kind of turn a corner and pick up some yardage. Does decently well between the tackles, catches the ball really well. And that's what someone like Evan Holt does. He's a pass catcher. He caught 50 balls there in his last year with Northwestern. So he's a guy that no stranger to that. I think I've only seen him drop like 1 pass the whole summer out there at Grand Park. So that's a guy, if he or Jackson can really nail down the ability to block and pass protection on third downs, that'll go a long way to them eating into some of Zach Moss's snaps. Because Moss is a decent runner, but he's not a breakaway guy by any means. Whereas Jackson and Hull probably have a little more ability to pick up yardage downfield. So being able to be complete backs is probably going to go a long way towards their playing time. Now, looking into the wide receiver group, obviously the Ashton Dulin injury opens things up a little bit at the bottom of the depth chart. You look at guys like Mike Strawn, obviously, Amari Rogers. They've got some newcomers with James Washington. You've got a veteran like Rashad Perriman. I think those guys could really battle for those final, 5th, 6th spots at the receiver. Michael Pittman Jr. and Alec Pierce obviously have things locked down on the outside. We're still kind of figuring out who is going to be starting in the slot between Isaiah McKenzie and Josh Downs. For me, it seems like Josh Downs is going to be the guy at some point. It almost feels like the quarterback situation. Maybe it's the veteran at first, but once it looks like the rookie's really got it, it'll be his job. So 2 of the 3 practices during this previous week, Josh Downs was the primary first-team slot receiver. And Isaiah McKenzie took over on Thursday, but I think we'll see Downs start to get in there a little more. The thing with receivers, though, is there's so many, different mixtures of receivers that you're going to put out there, drive to drive, play to play. So it doesn't really matter who the starting slot receiver is because they're both going to get plenty of looks throughout a game. But for the sake of who's going to see more snaps by the end of the year, I do think it's just a matter of time until Josh Downs takes over and takes that spot. Looking at tight end, this is a group that was supposed to have this big glow up this summer. You know what I mean? Mo Alley-Cox was the incumbent, but clearly guys like Jelani Woods and Kylan Granson showed last year that they are bigger threats as pass catchers. Now, the big problem is Jelani Woods has missed almost every practice so far. Mo Alley-Cox himself has missed the last couple of weeks with an ankle injury. With Woods, he has a hamstring injury, which he also had a hamstring injury during the spring, so missed a lot of mandatory minicamp and some OTAs and things. So that's kind of a bummer to see. Will Mallory missed a lot of time, foot injury, hamstring. He's been able to come back, but Kylan Granson has really been the only constant when it comes to the top guys. So to this point, it seems like Granson is your de facto tight end 1. And when these other guys get back and healthy, I think you kind of have to let it ride with Granson and then Jelani Woods. You got to bring Woods back in, I guess, slowly a little bit to keep him healthy until he's fully 100%. But it's been a really interesting group. Drew Ogletree had, he's had some injuries as well. He has a shoulder injury currently, but he's back from that knee injury that ended his season before it could get started last year. But Jelani Woods, Drew Ogletree, Kylan Granson, these are three guys I think they're really going to rely on this season. I don't know if Mo Alley-Cox makes it. I think it's kind of dependent on if any of the other guys that they can block. I think that'll be a big deal, which kind of brings me to Farrell Brown as the next guy. He's kind of had a golden opportunity as one of the other healthy tight ends with Mo Alley-Cox out. Brown is a blocker as well. Receiving is not his thing. He was brought in to be a blocker. He had a holding penalty on a big Anthony Richardson run last week in the game against the Bills. And then earlier this week, he got thrown out from joint practices with the Bears for fighting on consecutive plays. So he is someone who has a golden opportunity, but we're going to really need to see a lot from him, these next two preseason games, and then whatever the coaches can see from him in this next week with joint practice with the Eagles. I don't know. This is a really interesting group. I think they wind up keeping 4 probably. 5 is a little too rich for tight end, even though they do have several guys who can compete to do it. But we'll have to see there. Looking at the offensive line, so I feel really split on this one because I think in general they'll be fine. I think the starting 5, that played the second half of last season and is currently in place now, I think they will be fine. But the problem becomes the depth because right now you've already got guys banged up. Ryan Kelly has missed the last few days with a foot injury. Will Fries has been out with a calf. So you're already missing 2/3 of your interior. Danny Pinter has been out there. He's been fine at center throughout his career, playing in place of Ryan Kelly. But we saw what happened at right guard last year. That was a big problem. Arlington Hambright right now is filling in at right guard with Will Fries out. I think Fries is probably only supposed to be out maybe a week or two. I don't think it's supposed to be any long-term, long week-to-week thing. But it just goes to show you if any of these guys go out, their depth could really be a problem. Because right now you're looking at Blake Freeland potentially as your backup left tackle, who's a rookie. He's your swing tackle this year. Whether Bernard Ryman or Braden Smith has to miss a little time, it's probably going to be Freeland that gets that first shake at replacing them. Now, Hambright, who is right guard right now, he's pretty much stayed pat as the second team left tackle, and he's been really good. He's been a pleasant surprise. He's been one of the big winners from this preseason. He's been steady. He had a good performance against the Bills as well. But then you're looking at, guys like Dakota Shepley and Carter O'Donnell, and, you just don't know who is going to be able to provide that depth. You don't really have anyone out there who you're like, okay, if this guy in the starting lineup goes down, this guy can come in from the second team and replace them. You really don't have that right now, and I think that's kind of a dangerous game to play. So the starting 5, I think, will be fine, but we know that injuries happen in the NFL. So for my money, I think the Colts probably still need to go out and get some more insurance. They did get Dan Skipper, the veteran offensive tackle, but he is pretty much solely a run blocker. If you're counting on him to be a pass blocker, it's not going to go well. If you look at his metrics, like from Pro Football Focus or what have you, from last year, even the preseason game against the Bills, the pass protection was not great, and you can't throw a guy out there who all he can do is run block. So that's another guy. Yes, he has started in the league before, but I really don't know how much confidence that garners when it comes to putting him in a lineup in front of a rookie quarterback who, you've seen the horror stories about Andrew Luck and everything before. You don't want to put Anthony Richardson in a situation where he's running for his life constantly. Can he run for his life? Sure. But you don't want to make him have to do that, especially if you want to develop him as a passer. So that's kind of the main gist of things with the offense. It's a work in progress. I think it's going to be interesting. I definitely like that it's Shane Steichen and Anthony Richardson pulling the strings there. But we'll see. I think it'll be a pretty good group by season's end as far as injuries don't get out of control. But looking at defense, this is the one that's got more experience on it. This is Gus Bradley and everybody's second year with this group. They still got a lot of veterans. Looking at the defensive line, obviously DeForest Buckner and Grover Stewart, that's the engine that drives that whole thing there. Those guys, you can hang your hat on them. They're going to give you everything. They've got great run defenders. DeForest Buckner's one of the better interior pass rushers in the league. Grover Stewart's getting a little better there. He can maybe give 4 or 5 sacks. But you're really counting on the health of Kwity Paye this year, who has been really solid throughout his first couple of years when he's healthy. But he had an ankle injury last year that took away several opportunities for him to really show what he's got. And that put Dayo Adengbo into a bigger role last year. He actually had a really hot end of the season. Hasn't done a ton yet in camp, but I think we'll probably see a little bit once we get into gameplay. He's probably a guy who will play a lot tonight, if I had to guess. But yeah, you're looking at Samson Abukum on the other side. That's a guy we haven't seen a whole lot from him yet this summer, but he's dealt with a lot of injuries as well. He missed the first couple weeks of training camp with his own hamstring injury, so that kind of created a problem in itself. He's probably trying to get his feet under him right now, but he's been really disruptive throughout his career. And I think you're still counting on Kwity to be, the top guy of that group from the defensive ends. And Abukum should be able to kind of feed off that. His pay takes a lot of the attention off it. So you hate to see, a guy like Jannard Avery go out for the season with his injury, because that's troublesome, because you kind of counter on him to come in and bring a little spark of pass rush. But Tyquan Lewis, what you're going to get from him while he's healthy. Really good run defender, can push the edge into the pocket a little bit as well. So that's a player. Knock on wood. He's had his injuries throughout his career, but what you're getting for how long he can give it to you. Khalid Kareem and Al-Qadim Muhammad are a couple of veterans that have done some nice things. We've obviously seen Al-Qadim Muhammad start here for a couple of years in Indy. He's back as a rotational player. As a second, third level pass rusher, I really like what he could bring to you. Defends the run is pretty well as well. Khalid Kareem, that's been kind of his thing. He's more of the big end run stopper. He had a really nice game against the Bills. Has had a decent camp so far, so we'll see what he can do there. Linebackers now. This is a interesting group as well, because Shaquille Leonard is back, yes, but is he going to be on a snap count? Like, what are they going to do with him? Are they just going to let him go full go, throughout the season? That would be nice. I think the fact that he played against the Bills was a really good sign, because you can't control what the Bills are doing. You're putting him into an environment where it's sink or swim, and he got through the game, so that was really good. Zaire Franklin obviously had an outstanding season last year, and his first season as a starter broke the Colts single season tackle record that used to belong to Shaquille Leonard, 167 tackles. Bobby Okereke is gone, so now you're looking ahead to what can EJ Speed provide in that third linebacker role, which he did have the third linebacker role last year in Leonard's absence, but I think it's going to be a little different this year. Talking to Gus Bradley, talking to linebackers coach Richard Smith, they've talked about needing to create a role for him and find more ways to get him involved, because he's a playmaker. Richard Smith is actually really, really high on him and thinks Speed can be a special player. So that's one to look at. The defensive coaching staff does think that they have better depth at linebacker than they did in years past. You're looking at guys like JoJo Doman, Grant Stewart, Segun Alubi to step up and kind of be the fourth linebacker. Last week, Stewart against the Bills went nuts, had 12 tackles. He was all over the field. He's fun to watch. Is he an every down type of linebacker? I don't think so. You can't really say that about any of these guys right now in terms of the depth guys. JoJo Doman is probably more of a pass defender. He's going to be better in pass defense than he is as a run stopper. Olubi, we really don't know yet. He's probably a practice squad guy. You want to see him develop a bit more, be able to identify the pass and the run, and just more consistency with diagnosing what's in front of him. The coaching staff shares that same opinion as well. Looking behind those guys at the cornerbacks, this is a youth movement. You obviously look at last year, you had Stephon Gilmore was your top cornerback. Kenny Moore was in flux, basically just not totally bought into the program, and he had his own injuries. He rotated between Brandon Faison and Isaiah Rodgers on the other boundary corner. You look at it this year, and it's just Kenny Moore that's back. Darrell Baker Jr. is a guy who none of us knew who the heck that was a month and a half ago. And now he's your top outside corner and has had a really strong camp. Probably the biggest riser out of camp, offense, defense, what have you. He has totally come out of nowhere to earn the defensive coaching staff's trust. Has just had a really big camp. We're going to see a lot from him this year. Kenny Moore kind of rejuvenated. He has bought in now. He's on the same page with the coaching staff. He's been making plays in camp. And, outside of Shaq Leonard, Kenny Moore has been your biggest defensive playmaker for the last several years. So getting a reinvigorated Kenny Moore is a pretty big deal to look at. And then right now you have Dallas Flowers as the other outside cornerback. I think that's just a matter of time until someone like Juju Brents comes in and kind of takes that role. You draft a cornerback in the second round to eventually start and play, So at some point, Brents will probably start this year, if I had to guess. But he's another guy who missed, the first couple weeks of training camp with a hamstring injury. So he's kind of getting up to speed as well. He missed a lot of time. So the safeties, interesting group, because what do? Most defenses, Gus Bradley's included, they only play two safeties at a time. So you look at that, Julian Blackmon and Rodney Thomas are your incumbents, right? Those are your two starters, free safety, strong safety. Julian Blackmon has been out. He missed most of camp. Since he's been back, he really hasn't even been full go, which has opened up a big door for Nick Cross. And, Nick Cross has had an outstanding camp. He's been able to play free safety and strong safety. Not only was Blackmon out, but Rodney Thomas was out for a few practices as well. So you get a guy like Cross in there to play either of those spots, and he has really, really grabbed the reins there. That's just a guy who, with as rough as his rookie season went, could not get on the field defensively. He's been a star. He's made star plays in practice, including in these joint practices against the Bears. And then, he goes in and everyone's talking about how well this guy is acclimating as far as his mental approach to the game as well. So he's been one of the big winners. But when you look at it in the season, how do you get all three guys on the field? You got to find a role for all three because all three of them have earned it. So that'll be really interesting to see how they approach this whole thing here. And with that all brings us up to the second preseason game here, Colts and Bears. How much will the starters play has been really the biggest question I've seen all week. And unfortunately, we don't know. We would normally, talk to the head coach, Shane Steichen, following the final training camp practice. We didn't get to talk to him on Thursday, unfortunately. But oftentimes opponents, opposing teams in the preseason will kind of do what the other is doing, you know what I mean? And so Matt Eberflus, the Bears head coach, said they're not going to start Justin Fields, their quarterback, and, they'll determine how much the starters in general are going to play. And I think that's what we'll see with the Colts. I think you've got to get Anthony Richardson out there, at least for a drive, First, to introduce him to everybody here at Lucas Oil Stadium, get him in front of the home crowd. But no, I think you at least got to get him out there for a drive or two. Being a rookie, being a guy who is so inexperienced in college, he's got to get those reps. And of course, you don't want to get him hurt. That's the whole thing. But he's a guy who still needs the reps. Now, that being said, I don't know how much those starting offensive linemen are going to play. I wouldn't put Ryan Kelly or Braden Smith out there. Quentin Nelson is probably not someone you're going to put out there either. So if they go with kind of a hodgepodge offensive line, you don't want Richardson out there for very long. So again, I would say probably if he plays, I would say he's probably going to go a drive or two. If they want to counter the Justin Fields thing, Justin Fields has already been in the league. This Anthony is just now here, so he's still a guy that needs the reps. I don't think that's going to be a lopsided thing, between the Colts and the Bears. Another reason that teams tend to not play starters as much after joint practices is that they really, really get a lot out of those joint practices. They can control things a lot more. They coordinate things with the opposing coaches quite a bit. What do you want to get out of this? Here's what we're going to do as well. Both sides were thrilled with, the Colts and the Bears, what they got out of those practices. Again, I mentioned Anthony Richardson got to look at a whole new defense than he's really ever seen in the pro level, because anything other than the Colts is something, he hasn't really seen yet. So they got a lot out of that. The defense stepped up in a big way. The Bears defense stepped up in a big way against the Colts as well. They shut down the passing game pretty steadily. Wasn't much from the run game out of Anthony Richardson. Both teams kind of had similar results, I would say. But that's another reason you don't see a lot of starters and stuff in these preseason games, because a lot of teams are doing the joint practices, and coaches tend to enjoy the joint practices more than they do the preseason games. So there are a ton of young guys that I think we need to see play for the Colts coming up today. You look at the offensive side of the ball, I think you're going to see a lot of Sam Ehlinger. For how much Anthony Richardson probably isn't going to play, I say Gardner probably finishes out the rest of the first quarter or so. And then after that, it's probably going to be a whole lot of Sam Ehlinger, who is probably better than a lot of other teams, third quarterbacks, I would say. Evan Hull is another guy I think we're going to see a whole lot from, because you're obviously down Jonathan Taylor, you're down Zach Moss. Deion Jackson is your next veteran guy. I don't think you want to run him into the ground. And so I think in that instance, you give this rookie Evan Hull a bunch of run today. Just see anything they still wanted to get out of him. How do you think he looks running between the tackles? Do you want to establish him outside? Do you think he's got that speed? Do you want to see him kind of follow his blockers at receiver on the outside? And then obviously, he can catch the ball as well as any other running back on the roster. So looking at things like that, how does he look in pass protection? I would play him a significant amount today, because this week and next week are going to be big games where you find out who is Evan Hull. Can he be your third or fourth running back throughout the season? I think today and next week will go a long way towards figuring that out. And then at wide receiver, we got to figure that out too. Now that Ashton Doolin's down, you have Michael Pittman and Alec Pierce, Josh Downs, and Isaiah McKenzie. But who comes after that? Mike Strawn has always been a guy who has really thrived in the summertime. He's had great camps every year. But when the lights come on and the regular season starts, he really hasn't been able to put it together. There has been some mental things we've seen out there at camp, like not being ready for the ball, or just, not necessarily fighting for a jump ball that's easily going to be his. So there's some things that we'll see. I'm curious to see Shane Steichen's true evaluation of him, because Mike Strawn always was a Frank Reich receiver before. Amari Rodgers is another guy who has been kind of discarded around the league. He's had a lot of ball security issues when it comes to the return game, kickoff, punt return stuff. But he has looked awesome throughout training camp since coming to the Colts a couple weeks ago. He's made some really impressive. He's had a couple nice one-handed catches, had a nice downfield catch from Anthony Richardson and one-on-ones that went for a touchdown. He is another guy that can give you some juice there at the slot receiver. You have Downs, McKenzie, but who's that third guy? I think Murray Rogers makes a really strong case. And now that Ashton Dulin is out, he's a guy that I would definitely expect to contribute to that. We'll just have to, I guess, see his level of participation in special teams. That's always the big X factor when you're looking at a guy that's at the bottom of a position group. So could a door open for him to be a gunner now on the punt team? What's he going to do in these coverage teams? I'm pretty intrigued to see that as well. And then you've got guys like Rashad Perriman, who's played a bunch of games in the NFL. James Washington, a bunch of games in the NFL. Vincent Smith has played before as well. Jawan Winfrey. So you got a bunch of veterans fighting for these last couple of spots. So I think these last two preseason games will be pretty entertaining to watch. And then two guys that we should be watching tonight as far as tight end goes, Pharaoh Brown and Will Mallory. We know what Kylan Granson is. We know Drew Ogletree is a stud. But Pharaoh Brown, does he rebound from this rough last week that he's had? Does he stand tall as a blocker? Because it doesn't really matter what he contributes as a receiver, because that's not why he's here. He's here to be that blocking tight end. So does he stand out in that regard, or what happens there? And then as far as Will Mallory goes, he's a newer rookie as well. Has missed a lot of time with injuries throughout the season, or throughout the summer. So you're looking really just for anything from him. I feel kind of about Will Mallory right now how I do about Evan Hull. Let him play dang near the whole game. Throw the book at him. Let him experience everything. What does he look like blocking? What does he look like lined up in the slot, split out wide against linebacker, safeties, what have you? So just see what you've got in a guy like Will Mallory, because we're getting pretty close to cut down time. We're getting close to figuring out what guys do you want to keep around, and who maybe do you want to try and stash on the practice squad. Looking at the defensive line as well, looking for some young guys to really stand out. You got Titus Leo at edge. A door is open there with Jannard Avery now. Those are two guys that we're going to be playing the Leo spot. Adetomi, Adebore, and Eric Johnson, they're kind of on the same peg there. Young defensive tackles, what do we want to see from those guys? As far as Johnson goes, this is his second year. He's shown a lot of power and explosion at certain points. That's kind of Ade's thing as well. He's an explosive guy. He's got long arms. So you want to see a little more from them. I would play those guys extensively as well. Looking back at linebacker, you got Grant Stewart and JoJo Doman. A couple guys battling for that fourth linebacker spot. Stewart played with his hair on fire last week. Looked great. JoJo Doman, you kind of want to see him answer that as well. Again, he doesn't have to be the total package. You don't have to see him, just getting in there in the trenches and clogging up the lanes. If his best asset is chasing guys down and breaking up passes, sure, that's his role. Again, you're not really looking for him to be everything. And looking in the secondary, you've got a lot of young guys you're looking at today. Juju Brents, Jalen Jones, Darius Rush, that trio of your rookie cornerbacks. You really want to see what you have from them. Rush seems like the third horse in that race right now, but he's the one who's had the most big plays, oddly enough. Had a pick six last week against the Bills, had a pick six in practice against the Bears. So he's responded really well. I think you're looking for consistency with him, because he has also kind of given up some big plays as well. So you're looking to kind of even that out. But with these rookie corners, that's going to come. You're going to give up some plays, but you just want to make sure that they're rebounding from those, but also making their own plays. Juju Brents, just continue that trajectory, man. He's looked decent in camp. I haven't noticed him give up anything big. He has had some penalties. He's a physical corner. He's kind of grabby, but you want to see him iron that stuff out before the regular season starts. Has been aggressive at attacking the ball too. Tries to break up a lot of passes. Jalen Jones, that's kind of been his thing too. He's been solid in coverage. You don't really want to let guys get behind him, but he's been able to use his size to keep guys within his stature. Nick Cross as well. He's kind of earned the right to not have to play much of the preseason anymore after the summer he's had. But he is, man, he's another guy that you keep playing him these last couple games, and at a certain point, you got to make a decision of, who is going to be this primary strong safety between him or Julian Blackman. Julian Blackman is a free agent after this season, and he has struggled with injuries throughout his career. You drafted Nick Cross to be, you were really, really excited about him being a star in your defense after this. So when does the future become now with him? If he's playing out of his mind, I think you got to just make that move at a certain point. So that's several guys I'm looking at here. I think that's that's about it for us today. If you guys are watching at home, you're not here at coming out here to the stadium today, not here with us at Nevermore. The game is going to be locally on Fox 59. We've got Greg Ragshaw, Rick Venturi, and Lara Overton on the call. It's on NFL Network nationally. You can also catch it on Colts.com. And then on the radio, it's 93.5 and 107.5. I think that's Hank FM, and then the fan on here. That's Matt Taylor, Joe Wright, and Jeffrey Gorman on the call. Everydayers, thank you so much for hanging here with us today. Thank you for everyone who is out here at Nevermore. I know, sorry if we weren't able to communicate much in the chat today, but we've got a live audience today. If you guys don't already, follow at Locked On Colts, at Jake Arthur NFL, and at Zach Hicks 2 on Twitter. Also, be sure to subscribe to Locked On Colts on YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts. We'd also love your guys' ratings and reviews. And with that, Zach and I will see you guys after the game. Thanks again so much.